Our friend Joseph Bedwell asks this. In MMA, is it possible to hit somebody hard enough to win the fight, but pull the punches enough to avoid serious injury to your opponent? You know, because people don't mind getting hurt. But if you seriously injure your fellow fighters, they're probably not going to like being in the cage with you very much. On that note, if you keep giving your opponent serious injuries, I imagine your career will be pretty short. Okay, a few different questions there. Is it possible to hit somebody hard enough to win the fight, but without seriously injuring them? Yeah, it is. It absolutely is, if you put them in a position where they can no longer intelligently defend themselves. So your grappling has to be good. If you get your opponent into a mounted triangle, for example, and then start tapping them in the skull with some strikes, well, the referee may stop it. He may not, if he sees you're not making a concerted effort to finish the fight, because the goal of mixed martial arts is to damage your opponent. That is how fights are scored. Whoever does more damage wins the round. Damage is the major factor that the judges are looking at. Damage is what the referee is looking for as the cue to stop the fight. So if you're not willing to damage your opponent, mixed martial arts may not be the sport for you. Now, it is possible to win a fight without even throwing a single punch. I have. Man, I had a fight against this dude named Stephen Wolf, and he's a very game competitor. Didn't have a great fight record, but again, a very game competitor, great guy. And I went out there and fought him, and he shot in for a takedown early on. I pulled up guard. I managed to catch him in a triangle choke variation called the teepee and choke him unconscious without throwing a single punch and without receiving a single punch. So it was a punchless fight, essentially a short grappling match in the cage. And that can happen, and it does happen. Okay? I mean, in the early UFC, we saw Royce Gracie win a bunch of fights without throwing punches, and then a few where he's just like slapping them around a little bit, but eventually getting the submission. So if your goal is to get a TKO with pitter-patter strikes that aren't actually damaging your opponent, probably not. But if your goal is to win via submission and use those non-damaging strikes to perhaps encourage your opponent to move in a position where you want him to be, yeah, you can totally do that. That's totally doable. But let's address the rest of your question. People don't mind getting hurt. Actually, they do. People hate getting hurt. I always hear fighters say, I love getting punched. I love getting punched in the face. It's a great feeling. I love it. No, you don't. You liar. You don't like getting punched any more than the other guy. There are people who mind getting punched a little less than the other guy, but nobody really likes it. What else did you say? If you injure your fellow fighters, they're probably not going to like being in the cage with you very much. Well, good, they shouldn't. Your opponent should not want to be in there with you. If you want to win fights, you need to put the fear of God in your opponents, my friend. You need to make him regret stepping in the cage with you. And that's not nice. That's not the way we deal with each other in normal, civilized society. But a fight cage is a cage. It is not civilization. It is not society. It is a cage. A cage with dirty, rotten cage fighters in there who are there to scrap and hurt each other and do damage. And man, that is a lesson I wish I would have learned a lot earlier than I did. I had a coach, a guy named Jeff Moody. He actually knocked me out once. I fought him in a Muay Thai fight. And he knocked me out pretty quick. He was a bit bigger than me, actually a lot bigger than me. And man, it felt like getting hit by a truck. But one thing he had that I did not was aggression in spades. And after that fight, he came up to me and said, I want to coach you. And he did. And he taught me something very important about aggression. Fights are judged on 3 parameters, MMA fights, effective striking, effective grappling, and effective aggression. Often called ring control or cage control or whatever you want to call that. But aggression, meaning at the end of the day, when all other things are even, what do the judges look at? They look at who appears to have won the fight more, who appears to have been making a more concerted effort to finish, who was more aggressive in that attempt to finish the fight. And I remember getting ready for a fight. It was a kickboxing match. And Jeff, he's cornering me. He's getting me ready for this fight. He's trying to help me get in the right headspace for this. And I'm a nice guy. And back then I was nice to a fault at the wrong time. And when you're getting in the ring or in the cage, that's the wrong time to be a nice guy. And my opponent gets in the ring first, and he points at him and he says, "See that guy? He's dancing. Look at him, he's dancing around out there, bouncing up and down. He thinks this fight is his. He thinks it's fun. He thinks it's going to be a fun little romp. You going to let him do that? You going to let him insult you like that?" And I'd never heard anyone talk to me like this, like, what? Well, you're so intense, man. This is making me feel weird. But, man, he got right up in my face and gave me this narrative, trying to get me hyped up, trying to put me in a dark enough headspace where I was able to go out there and hurt another human being. And I got ramped up, and I'm thinking, like, I'm starting to tell myself this narrative, like, man, I could be doing anything else but getting in a ring and scrapping with a guy right now. I could be at home, I could be playing video games, I could be hanging out with my wife, I could be, doing anything else, but it is his fault that I am here. It is his fault, and I'm going to take it out on him. Now, I'm not saying you should fight angry. Don't. Why? Because anger gets you into a cage, it doesn't get you out. Anger gets you into a fight, it doesn't finish the fight for you. But you do need to put yourself in a dark enough headspace where you are able to hurt and damage another human being. You need to exit civilization and enter the cage. You need to be an animal for a little bit. Not everybody can do that easily. Most people have to be trained. That's one of the reasons we train. That's one of the reasons I put the phrase, "put some violence in your violence" in some of my videos. What does that mean? Put some violence in your violence. I train a lot of people who are good at technique. They're good at throwing punches and kicks and takedowns and doing submissions, and they're really technical, and their technique is beautiful, but then they actually get down and scrap, and what happens? They fall apart a little bit because they don't know how to put violence in their violence. A punch is a violent action, but we must put violent intention behind it too in a fight. There's another part of this question I want to comment on. On that note, if you keep giving your opponent serious injuries, Joseph says, I imagine your career will be pretty short. Well, to the contrary, I believe if you give your opponent serious injuries, their careers will be short. Take a look at this dent in my face right there. That's a depressed skull fracture I got in my last fight. That is a serious injury that almost killed me. Because of that, my career was cut short. My opponent is now fighting in the UFC. It's not fair and egalitarian. We're not here to hold hands and be friends. We're here to scrap and fight and hurt each other. Let's be honest, let's be frank, that's what cage fighting is at the end of the day. And you might not like that answer, but that is the honest truth about it. That is the honest, bare bones truth about what cage fighting is. So can you win with minimal damage to your opponent? Yes. Can you win by being a big jerk and hurting him as much as possible? Yes. How should you fight? Well, that's entirely up to you. And if your method is allowing you to win fights, and you are winning fights consistently, cool. I'm not going to question it. I'm not going to tell you to change. But if your method is causing you to lose, if your method is getting you beat up, that's not the right one, my friend. Thank you for the question. Now get out there and train.